Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Welcome into another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. It's Thursday, February 18th. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you guys are down in the Lone Star State, the state of Texas down south, hopefully you're staying safe, staying warm. I got a handful of buddies during my time playing college ball, summer travel ball down there that have been without power for 24, 36, 48 hours. They had a couple of pipes burst. I know up in Dallas there was a big car accident over the past week up there. Now there's snow, ice on the ground. Not a lot of people are prepared for it, ready for it. So if you guys are down in Texas, please stay safe, stay warm. Hopefully you're going to your car to charge your phone, run that thing, heat up a little bit. But man, it's just crazy what's going on down there, because in Texas, while it was in the single digits, up here in the Northeast in Philadelphia, we had our first day in the mid-40s on Tuesday, which was nice. Some of the snow melted out here, was able to shovel some things that had previously frozen over. But as you're listening to this here on Thursday into Friday, we're getting another 6 to 12 inches of snow, depending on where you're at. So that storm that was down in Texas over the Midwest, Minnesota, is in the minus degrees, wind chill, even 0 was the high one day I saw. That stuff's coming to the Northeast here, and we're getting it in a couple of days. So things are certainly crazy out there weather-wise, and it certainly doesn't align with spring training and pitchers and catchers reporting, which is exactly what happened over the past 48 to 72 hours, depending on when you're listening to this. But all teams have reported to camp by the time this is out there. There are workouts coming here in the next day or two for every one of our organizations that we root for out there. So spring training is officially here. Like I said, it was 40-something in the Northeast, so it just, the smell of spring was in the air. I was getting fired up, ready to go, but I was brought back to earth there with everything going on across the U.S. So outside of the state of Florida, everybody dealing with this Arctic blast, winter freeze, whatever you want to call it here. And I myself, another snow day coming, probably with my daughter at home here Thursday, Friday, and her birthday this weekend, so looking forward to that. But we got a great show lined up for you guys here today. Like I mentioned off the top, we'll talk a little bit about spring training, everything that you guys can expect, some frequently asked questions of, what's going on out there. Then in segment number 2, we'll talk about the recent signings, updates, rumors, everything going on. And then we'll have some fun on the back end of today's episode, where I'll go through my American League and National League playoffs and ultimately how I think those are going to play out here in 2021. So, last year I did a bunch of that stuff in March, April, May, when things were shut down during the coronavirus. I'm hoping I can get it out of the way here in the month of February, March, talking about awards, talking about predictions, because I'd much rather talk about actual baseball with you guys during the months of April and May than when we're going to get back, what's going on with the collective bargaining agreement. So I think we're on the right trajectory here with coronavirus cases certainly plummeting nationwide, at least here in Pennsylvania as well. Vaccine rollouts seem to be on the uptick here, more and more available to you guys out there. Certainly don't know your stance on the vaccine or whatever, but the cases continue to go down, and things certainly seem to be getting better here, and maybe we can have ourselves a great summer and get a bit of normalcy back here in the building. But like I mentioned, pitchers and catchers have reported. All 30 teams here are now in either Florida or Arizona. The last teams to report are the Minnesota Twins and the New York Mets. Not sure why, but they actually report today, February 18th. Recording this late on Wednesday night, but by the time you're listening to it, it is the 18th. And every other team up until this point will at least have a workout. 15 out of the 30 teams will get a workout in on the 17th. Those teams are the Diamondbacks, Orioles, Cubs, Tigers, Royals, Angels. Let's see here as I'm scrolling. Yankees, Athletics, Phillies, Pirates, Cardinals, Padres, Giants, and the Texas Rangers all get underway on the 17th. That's the first workout for pitchers and catchers. And then on the 18th, the 13 out of the remaining 15 will give it a go, and that is the Braves, Red Sox, White Sox, Reds, Indians, Rockies, Astros, Dodgers, Marlins, Brewers. Then we have the, let's see here, keep scrolling, Mariners, Rays, Blue Jays, and Nationals. And then on the 19th, like I mentioned, the final two teams, the last ones to get going, the Minnesota Twins and the New York Mets will finally get underway. So all pitchers and catchers have reported. Now, what is the first workout consist of? Honestly, it's a lot of PFPs. And for those of you out there who don't know what that stands for, it's pitchers fielding practice. So a lot of times they'll get a guy out at first base or get you on the mound. They'll do a light throwing program because, again, a lot of these guys have been throwing during the offseason to stay in shape, work on it, improve. But, a lot of them don't do pitchers fielding practice because, honestly, it's the worst part of the gig. I mean, back when I was playing D1 baseball, in between starts, you'd have infield, you'd have outfield, taking ground balls, fly balls. Well, pitchers would kind of go into one corner of the outfield and work on PFPs. You'd have somebody fungo balls back to them. Then you'd work on that fungo over to first base with you covering, getting your footwork down, receiving the pitch, the timing and everything that happens there. So a lot of that will be taking place on day one. They'll get a light throw in, then some PFPs, maybe a run, a jog, long distance, some sprints, try to get the blood flow, body back. A lot of these guys will be down south and in the heat for the first time during the offseason. Again, spring training taking place in either Arizona or Florida, so a lot of these guys coming from the Northeast, Midwest, North, wherever they're from, they've been working indoors with the snow outside, so they're not accustomed to 80-plus degrees like it is down in Florida getting workouts in. So they're going to try to make them accustomed to the heat, get aware of their body, and kind of find their footing. And then by the time this weekend rolls around, at least everybody will have started to throw a bullpen. And how they typically work the throwing program. Now, each team is different. My college was one way. Summer ball teams were another. But a lot of teams like to start with just fastball changeups. They don't like to put a lot of stress on the elbow. But again, times have changed in the 10 years since I played college baseball because now these guys, they're continuing to throw year-round, basically, to hitters at performance complexes and staying in shape, working on breaking balls. And a lot of times, we used to take a month, 2 months off, and you didn't want to put that strain on your elbow when you first came back. With the curveball slider, that snapping of the wrist down basically puts a lot of stress on your elbow. So a lot of teams like to start out with fastball changeup, start out with mechanics, try to get your rhythm back, your leg lift, as well as when you're breaking your hands, get your timing symmetrical once again. But these guys continue to stay in the groove year-round, so it'll probably be up to them as to how many pitches they want to throw, whether they're going to work their entire arsenal. But this is the first time that the teams are getting their eyes back on these guys. So it'll be fascinating to see kind of how these work, and do people stand in on it, or do they have umpires behind the catchers? That's been new here over the past handful of years. Even from bullpens, they have umpires come in to kind of get a look on it, as well as the pitchers visually get used to the umpire being behind the catcher and calling balls and strikes, and being able to chart strikes, working on the quadrants. Hey, we're looking down and away here. It was up and in. Yes, it was still a strike, but you missed your quadrant, and having a lot of data that way to be able to continue to improve and work from the jump on how to get better. So pitchers and catchers are there through the weekend, and then after that, they will be joined by the rest of the squad. Position players will report on the 21st and 22nd, which I believe is Saturday, Sunday of this upcoming weekend. So they'll find their way down to camp over the weekend. And then the first full team workouts will take place Monday and Tuesday of next week. So I'll talk to you guys again next Monday, which is when a majority of the teams will get their first full workouts in. Again, pitchers are welcoming the rest of the units at this point because they've had about 5 days of PFPs, and if maybe you're getting a little extravagant, you're working on pop-ups. But now they're getting some batting practice so the pitchers can relax, do some fielding, do some shagging out there in the outfield. So the rest of the squads will report this weekend to start to get their workouts in here moving forward. But by the time I talk to you guys Monday, every team will be on site. Every team will have been reported, and baseball season will officially be underway. So certainly an exciting weekend here, even though it is the middle of February. I also believe it's opening weekend for college baseball across the country. So if you guys are really dying to check out some baseball, head to your local university, check out the schedule, especially if you're down south. I know us here in the Northeast would always travel down south for the first month or so of the season. Like I said, another 6 inches of snow coming up here, so you can't exactly play ball at home this weekend, but we'd usually go down to the Virginias, the Carolinas, heading down that way to be able to get some games in as the season got underway. But back to the big league action. When do the spring training games actually start? And that'll be the following weekend. So we're still about 10 days away from opening day, spring training. I got one more week here to talk to you guys without actual games to discuss. The 28th and 29th, I believe, is when people start. Yes, 28 out of the 30 teams are slated to play on February 28th, with the Cubs and Mets being the only teams that are not on the schedule that day, and they will open up on the 30th or the 29th. Oh, no, that'll be March, I think, right? February's only got 28 days. Listen to me. I'm just confused here already. But, yeah, so everybody starts on the 28th, except for a couple of teams. They'll be going here the next day after that. So by the time 2 weeks from now comes around, I'll have some game action to talk about with you guys. And what's going on with the schedules this year? So you may have read the Grapefruit League, which is the Florida League. So you have the Cactus League out in Arizona and the Grapefruit League down in Florida. The Grapefruit League changed up their schedule just to be a bit more geographical, because the Florida teams are a bit more spread out than the Cactus Leagues. The Cactus guys are pretty much all around the city of Phoenix, Scottsdale, that part of Arizona out there. So each one of those teams will be playing 2 games apiece against the other 14. So they'll have a total of 28 games. But in Florida, to limit travel, they actually split up these teams into groups. And you have the East Coast group, which essentially is made up of the Astros, Marlins, Mets, Cardinals, and Nationals. They'll play 24 games only amongst those other 4 teams, so they're going to get a good look at each other, basically playing 6 games against each of the other 4 teams. And then they have the West Coast of Florida, basically divided into 2 main groups. So there's 3 groups down in Florida, East Coast, and then 2 on the West Coast. One of the groups on the West is the Blue Jays, Phillies, Tigers, and Yankees. Again, they'll be playing a handful of games against the other teams just in that group itself. And then the final group is the Braves, Rays, Red Sox, and Twins. So, it's going to be tough down there because the Orioles and Pirates are kind of splitting their time. So it is a bit confusing. I know I didn't lay it out there best as possible, but it really is. 3 groups, a couple of floater teams. They're trying to get a total of 28 games in, but limit the travel, keep it more geological. So wherever your team is, if you follow and they're down in Florida in the Grapefruit League, you may want to pull up their schedule because there have been a couple of changes that have taken place here over the handful of days. But are there going to be fans at the games? And short answer, yes. Long answer is it's complicated, and stay tuned. So teams in both Arizona and Florida are selling tickets to spring training games. But, of course, there are COVID-19 protocols that will be in place. There's going to be limited capacity, pod-style like seating. Again, kind of keeping your group together while separating with others. There's going to be strict rules around masks and social distancing. There have been changes to the ballparks, the setups down there to keep the players safe. First 6 rows unless there's plexiglass, not a lot of drinking, not a lot of that stuff. But it does seem similarly to the championship series in the World Series that there are going to be fans at these games. And I think this is a nice little test to kind of see how we can do this in the regular season, because like I mentioned at the top of the episode, with the vaccine rollout, the numbers daily continuing to decrease, there could be a chance for opening day to allow fans in the ballparks. Now, how many fans can we get in? Where can we sit them? Do we open all levels? Spring training is going to give a nice little buffer period because over the course of a month, I also think you'll be able to see, hey, where these teams are located, are we seeing an increase in coronavirus cases? Has there been a spike, particularly in the city of Clearwater, if you're a Phillies guy, or Tampa, or wherever your team is located? And if that is the case, are they able to correlate due to tracing back to the spring training games? Is that the reason? And, is this manifesting itself in more cases? So it'll be certainly fascinating to kind of follow that storyline and see ultimately if fans make a difference, or if, again, because it's outside, we haven't seen a lot of tracing and contact tracing being the reason for spreading when the event's outside. And hopefully that is the case here in spring training, because I would love to go to a game coming up here in the month of April in Philadelphia. But that'll do it for the opening segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Again, check out your local squad to see their dates and their schedules, whether it's Florida, Arizona for spring training. Things are a little bit fluid here, but teams have reported we're going to have some workouts. And by Monday's episode, we'll have some stuff to discuss. Hopefully not any injuries, but, those do pop up from time to time down in spring training. So we'll step aside here now for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, I'll talk to you guys about all the latest signings and rumors taking place here. As teams are reporting, there's still a couple of free agents out there. So stick around, everybody. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back, and thanks for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Do me a favor, head to social media, check out the Baseball Podcast social media pages, whether it's LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever out there you guys are on social media. Type in GSMC Baseball. Give us a like, give us a follow, subscribe. That helps us continue to grow our platform, continue to allow people who, now that baseball season, pitchers and catchers have reported, they're looking for baseball content to stay up to date with everything that's going on. So the more likes we get, the more follows, shares, all that good stuff. It helps people find our page as we continue to grow into this great 2021 season here. But as well as follow the GSMC Podcast Network on all these pages. So the baseball team and the baseball pages will keep you up to date with everything going on the diamond. But the Podcast Network will keep you up to date on everything else out there. And like I mentioned, coronavirus, politics, news, music, movies. There's a lot of stuff going on. So if you find yourself interested in any of that, give the Podcast Network a follow. It's a great page to stay up to date with all the latest action out there. So here we are, second segment, where we're talking about the latest signings, trades, rumors, all that good stuff going on out there in Major League Baseball. And honestly, we'll start out at the top here. A ton of one-year deals have taken place. And we're at that point in the offseason where teams are saying, hey, there is no market for you, Mr. Player, in regards to a long-term deal. If you're waiting for a long-term deal, it doesn't look like it's coming, so sign with us for 1 year, whether you're at the tail end of your career or in the middle of your prime, coming off a bad year. It's about that time we start to discuss one-year agreements and go year to year at this point, as well as a lot of pitchers coming off the board. I talked about everybody was waiting for Trevor Bauer to sign to kind of set the market for the pitching side of things. Some relief pitchers continue to go off, guys who may be looking for 2 to 3 years, but again, now realize their market isn't to this level, and they're going to have to surrender and take 1 year just to stay employed, stay in the league, stay in the show. So a lot of these guys signing one-year deals on the lower side of things when it comes to monetary value as well. But let's go here. Let's see. Outfielder Kevin Pillar signs with the Mets as the Mets continue to fill in that center field role. You know, they signed Almora Jr. To a one-year deal a week or two ago, but it came out he's essentially a rotational guy, a defensive guy. He doesn't hit very well, so they stayed in the market, but Jackie Bradley Jr., his asking price was a bit too high for what they were looking to pay, so they then turned their attention to Kevin Millar, who signed a one-year $5 million deal with the Mets. There is an option for a $5 additional million next year. Now, there's no buyout if the team declines, but there's a player option. So essentially, Pillar's deal can either break down to 1 year, $5 million, 2 years, $6.5 million, or $7 million, or 2 years and $10 million, depending on which option is exercised or how his performance plays out. But Pillar gets a guaranteed $5 million from the Mets here for a year. He'll be out in center field. He'll rotate with Almora. There's a couple of other guys out there looking for time, and just kind of a fascinating signing because they were very much in on George Springer, who ultimately spurned them and took the Blue Jays offer, and now they fill in Springer with Almora and Pillar. I don't think it's what New York had envisioned and what Sandy Cohen thought would happen at the beginning of the offseason with his center field position. So it has to be a bit of a disappointment if you're a Mets fan, but they're just kind of filling in the gaps there with some small year-to-year pieces, and they're going to try to swing again next year for one of the big fish in the outfield, I'm sure. Next up, we have a relief pitcher, left-handed pitcher Justin Wilson. Re-signs with the Yankees. I was unable to find the terms on his deal. I assume it is a one-year deal, probably in that $4 to $5 million range, based on where the rest of the market is coming in at here. And these other signings that took place over the last 48 to 72 hours. But Wilson returns to the Yankees. He threw for them in the past. I believe 2015 was his time in the Bronx. So he's used to the market. He's used to playing in New York City, having that pressure. And the Yankees continue to bring in relief pitching, knowing that they're not done and they're going to have to continue to improve the ball club if ultimately they're going to challenge the White Sox as well as the Dodgers, Padres, Braves for the best team in the league here in 2021. Next, we have Yusmeiro Petit, the right-handed relief pitcher. He signed with the Oakland A's for a one-year, $2.5 million deal. And the A's certainly were looking at it, like I mentioned in my previews for division standings. They lost a lot of guys. They were moving on. And, you know, the biggest one may have been in the bullpen with Liam Hendriks. So they saw an opening out there, knew they needed to upgrade, especially from the right side. They got Jake Diekman from the left side, who has certainly found himself and is a nasty guy from the left side, but the right side needed help. So they signed Petit as well as Sergio Romo, a right-handed relief pitcher for the A's. He also signed a one-year, $2.5 million deal. So A's fans out there, you guys got Petit and Romo for 1 year and a combined $5 million. I like these additions. I mean, $5 million for these guys. Romo, his slider is nasty. He's not going to overpower you with velocity. Hitters know it's coming, but they've known it's been coming for, 10 years now. 5-7 years now. Romo's been relying on that slider, and teams still haven't been effective against that pitch. I mean, even dating back to his time with the Giants, winning multiple World Series out there, getting key outs out of the bullpen. So Petit and Romo added to the A's, I do think it increases their ball club, and they're a better team today than they were yesterday with adding these to the bullpen. So it'll be fascinating to see, once again, if that rotation can kind of hold it together there, piece things together, and get to that bullpen, which was one of the better units. But losing a couple of guys, adding Petit, adding Romo, I like the moves for the Oakland A's. And again, at $5 million for those guys combined, that's excellent value out there. And Billy Beane continues to work around the edges and find value at the margins, which is a nice saying people in the analytics and sabermetrics world like to use out that way. So relief pitchers continue to fly off the board. Kiwan Kila signed with the San Diego Padres. Right-handed relief pitcher, former closer of the Pittsburgh Pirates. He signed a one-year, $3.75 million deal, and the Padres continue to add arms. I mean, he's the second former Pirates closer that they've added in the past week. Last time I talked to you guys, they added Mark Melancon, who was with Pittsburgh, then down to Atlanta after signing a huge deal, but former closer of the Pirates. Then it was Keyone Keela closing for the Pirates. He's now out in San Diego, and San Diego doesn't sit back and let the Dodgers scare them after the Dodgers bring in Bauer, make a couple of trades, which we talked about on, I believe it was Monday's episode of this week. And it'll be fascinating to see how that ultimately breaks down between San Diego and L.A. this summer. Who stays healthy, who regresses, who progresses. It'll be fascinating to watch that. But Keela to the Padres as the Padres continue to make moves. I mean, just pull up the Padres offseason moves. Off the top of my head here, I know I'm going to miss some guys, but like we said, we got Melancon, we got Keela, we got Snell, we got Darvish, we got Musgrove. That's 5 right there. Who else? I know I'm missing a guy or two. They got Kim at second base from Korea as well, and they brought back a couple of guys. So 7 or 8 moves being had out there by the Padres. Certainly a fascinating offseason. While everybody's pinching pennies due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Padres are going for broke, and I'm a huge fan of what's going on. Next on the free agent list, we got right-handed relief pitcher from Japan. The gentleman signed Hirokazu Sawamura, signed with the Boston Red Sox. He signed a 2-year, $3 million deal guaranteed, but that could get up to, I believe, $6 or $7 million based on incentives, innings pitched and things like that, games completed. So Sawamura was certainly effective over there in Japan. It had been rumored earlier he was contemplating coming to the States. His market wasn't as hot as it was for the starting pitcher earlier who decided to return back to Japan. But the Red Sox at 2 years and $3 million, $1.5 million, not much of a risk there. I mean, a lot more reward. So I like that. Low risk move, high reward if they get a nice bullpen arm for $1.5 million. I mean, Romo Petit signed at $2.5. So Sawamura's ERA was fantastic for Japan. And I think it's a nice move by Chaim Bloom and the Boston Red Sox up there. Again, maybe not in contention this year in Boston, but kind of setting the page for that next window to shape up in a year or two and ultimately find out who's still going to be with the squad. Next, we have outfielder Jason Kipnis. He signed with the Atlanta Braves. He played last year for the Cubbies in the shortened season. I believe he signed a minor league level deal. I know I usually keep it to major league level deals here, but Kipnis, everybody knows the name during his time with the Indians in years past. For 4 or 5 years there in Cleveland, he was fantastic. He was really good offensively. Struggled last year for the Cubs, but hoping to find himself again for the Braves, potentially be that fourth outfielder, designated hitter when they play the American League, or pinch hitter late in the game during pitching changes. But everybody knows the name Jason Kipnis as he will head over to the Atlanta Braves for 1 year. Let's see, starting pitcher, right-handed pitcher, Matt Schumacher. He signed with the Minnesota Twins for 1 year and $2 million. He's coming over from the Toronto Blue Jays. This is a depth piece for Minnesota in their rotation. But Schumacher, he's shown flashes of, being a really good major league pitcher over the past handful of years. Struggled a bit in 2020. Couldn't find his groove in the shortened season, but I don't think you can put a lot of weight in that. I think, again, this is a number 4, a number 5 starter, maybe a long reliever that Minnesota's looking at him. And for $2 million to get a starting pitcher with big league experience, it certainly seems like a risk you should take. Because if you're the Phillies, I mean, you signed Matt Moore, Chase Anderson. Those guys are getting $4 or $5 million a pop. One of them coming over from Japan. One of them really struggled. So Schumacher at $2 million certainly seems like a nice gamble here if you're the Twins potentially moving forward. And then let's see, left-handed pitcher starter Tyler Anderson. He signed with the Pittsburgh Pirates. So the Pirates make a move. Once again, I think they're going to be the worst team in the National League. Them against the Rockies, probably for that basement, maybe number 1 overall pick next year. 1 year, $2.5 million for Tyler Anderson. But again, running out of big league starters, so not completely going tank mode. Anderson finds himself a job in the bigs, and Pittsburgh says, hey, here you go. Here's a signing we finally made to add after trading away all these guys, all these starters, Talion, Musgrove, Bell, shipping them all out of town. They bring in Tyler Anderson to help out that rotation. And we have left-handed pitcher starter Brett Anderson signed with the Milwaukee Brewers 1 year, $2.5 million. So again, a lot of these guys on the lower end here, and $2, $3, $4 million, just basically getting above veteran minimum. But Anderson stays in the show with the Brewers. The Brewers get a left-handed starter to add some depth to that rotation. And a lot of these guys, again, maybe if an injury occurs, could slide in, but will find themselves in that long relief, maybe number 6 spot in the rotation. We also have one trade to discuss here. The Marlins and the Tampa Bay Rays made a deal on Wednesday that is yet to be confirmed by the ball clubs, but a report by Ken Rosenthal out there. The Marlins acquired reliever John Curtis from the Tampa Bay Rays for first base prospect Evan Edwards. Curtis is only 27. He pitched 25 innings last season, had a 1.8 ERA. Was fantastic for the Rays. He also pitched with the Twins and Angels previously, so Miami adding a very solid right-hander to their bullpen as, they know going against some of these offenses in the NL East, they're going to need some help. And then Edwards going the other way to Tampa Bay as Tampa, again, kind of continues to reshuffle and is maybe looking at that next window a year or two from now. But Edwards was the Marlins' 4th-round pick in 2019. He hit .330 for NC State coming out of the draft, and again, doesn't have any minor league statistics to talk about because they didn't play last year. But you get a 4th-round pick, essentially, a first base prospect for a guy who maybe you think outperformed, his standards, or he'll come back to the median here moving forward. And the Rays continue to do business very well of shipping guys out, getting prospects, keeping that pipeline full, while not ultimately completely going against the grain for the current times at the major league level. So a lot of signings there, a lot of, lower level 1-year signings taking place. But who are the remaining free agents? I mean, pitchers and catchers have reported. So these guys are still without a job here moving forward. Maybe it's the market, maybe it's their demand, but just running off a quick list of the top 5 guys that are potentially still available. If you look at the lists out there, I had one up of the top 50 free agents. When free agency started, there's about 6 or 7 names still unsigned. The top 5 are Jackie Bradley Jr., and it's been reported that he's looking for a 4-year deal, which I don't think he's going to get, being in his 30s. I mean, 2, maybe a 3rd-year option is where you're looking at, Jackie. So you may want to bring those demands back down, but it certainly seems that the Red Sox are the team, or the only team that may be willing to pay him something like that. But 4 years, $40+ million for Jackie Bradley Jr., I don't think he's going to get it out there on the market. So maybe if he brings his demands down, he'll find a club. Then starting pitching-wise, you got Tajon Walker, who we've discussed the Mets could potentially be in on after missing out on Paxton, missing out on Bauer. You got Jake Odorizzi in that same limelight there, looking for a job, starting pitcher. Relief pitcher Trevor Rosenthal, who bounced back for the Padres last year, is still out on the market. And then outfielder Brett Gardner, who certainly seems like he's going to be headed back to the Yankees. But the Yankees aren't as willing to spend the money like the Dodgers are, because the Dodgers brought back Justin Turner. Gardner kind of in a similar situation with the Yankees. So it just, it seems like it's a matter of time. Gardner to the Yankees, JBJ back to the Red Sox, Walker, Odorizzi, and Rosenthal. Those are the guys that could really end up anywhere here moving forward, and are fascinating storylines to continue to watch. But that'll do it here for segment number 2 of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll step aside here one more time for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows. But when we come back, it's preview and prediction time. We're going to start out with the American League playoffs. Stick around, everybody. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
everyone, for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. It's Thursday, February 18th. Pitchers and catchers have reported. Baseball season finally underway. I don't get why there isn't more excitement on ESPN or all the sports channels on TV. I mean, when NFL training camp reports, everybody's there. Who's there? What's going on? Oh, this contract, he's upset. This is going on. Well, I'm getting none of that this morning on SportsCenter, and it's firing me up here to discuss with you guys because baseball season is officially here. It's opening weekend when it comes to college baseball. So turn on the TV. There's got to be some baseball on SEC Network, ACC Network, whatever it is. YouTube locally, Patriot League Network, whatever. Check it out. There's going to be some baseball played somewhere in America this weekend. And you guys can hear the crack of the bat going on there. Man, I just love watching those videos with the wooden bat. That sounds just fantastic as the snow is going to come down here Thursday, Friday this week in the Northeast. I got to find myself a mental vacation and pull up some baseball somewhere across the country. But do myself a favor, if you guys haven't checked out other shows within the podcast network on any platform you're listening to, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, first of all, please like, rate, and review this podcast. If you guys leave a comment, I'll certainly read it here on the show. I appreciate all the kind words you guys leave out there across all platforms. Like, rate, subscribe. But then also do yourself a favor. Just type in GSMC into that little magnifying glass search icon there, and you'll pull up a bunch of different shows within the podcast network, whether it's health and fitness, politics, news, books, movies, other sports. I mean, the NBA, NHL, sports going on across the board. I know football's done, but we're transitioning here into summertime, into baseball, playoffs coming up in the NBA and NHL. We got a Lake Tahoe game this weekend with the Philadelphia Flyers playing some outside hockey. It's going to be a lot of fun, so check out those shows. Whatever you're into, there's a podcast for you out there to certainly enjoy, and we appreciate it. So jumping into segment number 3 here, let's talk about previews and predictions. I went through basically every division over the past couple of weeks here, and it's now time to kind of get into the playoff aspect side of things. Where do I see people finishing? Where's everybody going to stop? And starting out in the American League, and the way I figured we'll do it is we'll start out with the wild card game. And honestly, in both leagues, I kind of see the first wild card team pretty much set. So in the American League Central, I have the White Sox winning the Central, which puts them right into the divisional round. And then I have the Twins finishing second. And I think the Twins are the best second-place team across all divisions, hands down. I think the American League Central, between the Twins and the White Sox, their record is going to clear that number 5 spot pretty convincingly to make them the home team for this one-and-done wild card round. Now, again, because we didn't have the expanded playoffs, it's no longer going to be a best-of-3 for each team or each series. It's going to be one and done, back to that particular style. So now who's the number 5 team? Who's the last team to make the playoffs? And this is where I think it's going to be an interesting race all the way down to the finish. I really do. And coming out of the American League, I have the Yankees winning the American League. So second place is a battle between Tampa and Toronto as to who ultimately is going to be able to get that second place spot. I think the Red Sox and Orioles are a bit behind them. And then out west, I mentioned to you guys I had the Astros winning the division, and that second place team between the Angels, the A's, after signing a couple of bullpen pieces, I think have a little bit better of a chance to potentially sneak in as a wild card. And then even the Seattle Mariners, because the Mariners surprised some people last year, and if you guys look at the pipeline or the top 100 prospects across Major League Baseball, the Mariners in that logo is pretty prevalent on that list. I mean, even in the top 10, I think they have 2 guys. So if those guys come out, surprise, develop, the Mariners could sneak in potentially as that number 5 team. But ultimately, I decided the Rays have moved on from too much. I don't like the Angels. Something always happens out there, whether it's health, age, whatever it is. I don't think they get there, and I'm going to give it once again to the Toronto Blue Jays. They made the playoffs last year. I like the additions they make to the team with George Springer, adding a couple of arms to the rotation. Now, none of them are fantastic in the rotation, and this is the one area that they could miss the playoffs because of, but Again, I think Springer, that offense, those kids should continue to develop, and I think they sneak in as that number 5 squad ultimately into that postseason game. So a one-and-done game between the Twins and Blue Jays that will be taking place in Minnesota. Now, just for purposes of this segment, I basically set up these rotations like they'd be perfectly set up. So your ace is going game 1 or your ace is going wild card round. So Toronto maybe getting in on the last weekend of the season. I don't know if their number 1's going to line up for the wild card spot, but it would essentially be Jose Barrios versus Hyun-Jin Ryu for the wild card round. I do think the Twins take this matchup. I like their offense playing at home. I think, again, they're the better team kind of all throughout. Don't sleep on the Blue Jays, though. Ryu's been fantastic for them for a couple of years now. Their offense should be spectacular with all these kids continuing to develop, but I like the Twins taking that matchup, which leads to some fantastic divisional round series. Number 1, I have the Chicago White Sox as the best team in the American League. This conversation came down to the White Sox and the Yankees as to ultimately who I think is going to have the best record. The Astros out west, I think the West is going to be a bit weaker, so they may even be like 85-80 or whatever the math is, 78 to get to 162. So I like the Astros in that 3 spot, but I like Chicago. I like the moves they made in the rotation, and I like their rotation compared to the Yankees to ultimately getting them that number 1 overall slot there. So I have the White Sox ultimately facing off against the number 4 seed Twins in a divisional matchup there. That'll be a lot of fun to watch because, of course, they have played a handful of times during the regular season there. But the matchups for these games, 1 through 5, again, I have for the Twins, Maeda going game 1 because Barrios just threw in that wild card game, so he wouldn't be available. But you have Lucas Giolito against Kenta Maeda going game 1. Dallas Keuchel against Dobnak in game 2. You got Lynn versus Barrios, who comes back in game 3. And then Cease versus Happ, J.A. Happ from Minnesota side going game 4. And then you would reset, of course, Giolito Maeda for game 5 there. So ultimately, how does this series play out? It would take place in Chicago. Giolito over Maeda. You would have to favor Giolito just because, again, he's been fantastic. No last year. Figured things out halfway through the year. Dallas Keuchel versus Dobnak. Potentially, that could be a game that the Twins get. Dobnak going to be in his year, too. He was fantastic rookie year. Keuchel, he's not going to miss a lot of bats. Ground ball pitcher, throws to contact, so maybe the Twins find themselves, get a good piece here, too. Game 3, Lance Lynn versus Jose Barrios. Barrios, who would win the wild card game, maybe he stays hot. Goes back to Minnesota, another game at home. He'd be on rest. Lance Lynn, first playoff matchup in quite some time. We'll see how that finishes out. And then Dylan Cease versus J.A. Happ. I would fancy Dylan Cease the advantage there. Happ struggled down the stretch. He had a higher ERA last year, so that would be an uphill battle. And ultimately, I would take the White Sox in 4 in this particular series. It's a best of 5 in the divisional round. I think the Twins win a game. Potentially Jose Barrios in game 3 at home against Lance Lynn. I think Giolito and Keuchel in games 1 and 2 in Chicago would be a tough go for the Twins there. And then Cease versus Happ ultimately gets the job done and wins this series for the White Sox in 4. So the White Sox advance to the ALCS, the championship series. Now, the other series we have here is the New York Yankees versus the Houston Astros. And this would be a fantastic series. Of course, the Astros, is this the last year of their current window? Who are they bringing back out of the core? They have Bregman signed for a number of years yet. Carlos Correa will be a free agent after this year, but there have been some talks that the Astros are looking to bring him back long-term. They brought back Michael Brantley for a year or 2. You'll have Yordan Alvarez returning, who missed last year, but 2 years ago was hitting the cover off the ball as a DH, breaking all types of records for rookie DHs in their first month. And it'll just be, hey, are we keeping him? Of course, because he'll be, under arbitration. But Altuve, he's getting to the end of his career there in Houston. So this comes down to the rotation for me. Garrett Cole, of course, in New York, going game 1 against Zach Greinke. Again, I'm just lining these up like the Aces are going the first couple of games here. In game 2, you have Talon versus Valdez. Talion coming over from Pittsburgh to New York. Valdez, he threw the most innings across all of Major League Baseball last year. I mean, that's a trivia question that not a lot of people are going to know, is including the playoffs, who threw the most innings in Major League Baseball. Francisco Valdez is not going to be the name that a lot of people are going to give you. But the Yankees could then go to Corey Kluber in Game 3 against Lance McCullers Jr. from Houston. You got Montgomery versus Javier. Going Game 4, maybe you reset for Game 5. I know you would if you're the Yankees. If you're the Astros, do you go Urquidy? Do you go back to Greinke? Do you do a combination of both? I think the latter is probably what takes place. But, ultimately, I think New York is just too strong for Houston. It would be fascinating to see once again if the Astros just flick that switch come playoff time. I mean, last year they were under 500 over the course of 60 games, but, really didn't even sneak into the playoffs, kind of had themselves a pretty good idea that they were going to make it, even though they were under 500, because it was 1-2 in each division, and there wasn't anybody kind of challenging them for that second slot there behind the A's. And just kind of fascinating to see once the playoffs hit, hey, Correa, flick the switch. Altuve, flick the switch. Bregman, he certainly didn't struggle. So, I mean, Correa was just a monster postseason. After a standard regular season, he stayed healthy for the first time in a couple of years. And then Altuve, he hit a couple of long balls in the playoffs, and they were a different team come postseason time than they were in the regular season. And again, with these kids, Urquidy, Javier, Valdez, they got a lot of time there in the playoffs that I think will benefit them for 2021 in the regular season here. But ultimately, I just think the Yankees are too deep offensively with Stanton. You got Judge out in right field, Sanchez behind the dish, Torres out there. So I think both offenses are very good, and that rotation of Cole, Kluber, Tallien, Montgomery, I think is just half a step better than Greinke, Valdez, Javier, and McCullers. And I'll take the Yankees in 4. Moving on in the divisional round to face off against those Chicago White Sox here in the American League Championship Series. And I think these two teams are clearly the two best teams in the American League. I mean, I'm not going on any bold predictions here or out on a limb giving you guys this matchup in the ALCS. If you give it a Google search, I'm sure you'll probably find a lot of people saying the White Sox and Yankees are kind of headed for the championship here. The White Sox were a step, in the right direction last year. I think they continue to develop, and the Yankees are just the evil empire. They continue to be there year after year after year. But here are the matchups once again, 1 through 7 taking place. Now, are the starters going to line up like this when it comes to real life? I don't know, but it's just fun for these purposes to kind of reset the rotation, get everybody lined up against themselves. So you'd have Lucas Giolito versus Garrett Cole in Game 1. You got Keuchel and Tallien going Game 2. Lynn versus Kluber in Game 3. And then Cease versus Montgomery in Game 4. Resetting there for Games 5, 6, and 7. Because, again, once you get to the championship series, and hopefully by October, things are back to normal. We're not on any neutral site, so we're traveling. Typically, you go Games 1 and 2, off day. Games 3, 4, 5, off day. 6 and 7, which basically means that you only need 4 starting pitchers to get through these rounds with the off days, as opposed to 5 or even 6 that teams use during the regular season. So Giolito, Cole, Keuchel, Tallien, Lynn, Kluber, Cease, Montgomery. I think advantage Chicago here when it comes to starting pitching. I mean, Game 1, slight advantage to Garrett Cole, but Giolito is no slouch, so Cole going twice. Maybe he wins both of those games, but Keuchel over Tallien, I think you got to go Keuchel, just the veteran, the savvy, kind of what's going on there. Lynn, Kluber. Yes, Kluber was good 3-4 years ago, Cy Young winner. But Lance Lynn, he's been a heck of a lot better recently as last year, the year before that. So I kind of favor Lynn. And then Cease over Montgomery is a certainly advantage in Chicago's side of things. And then offensively, both teams are loaded. I mean, the White Sox, you got Moncada, you got Abreu, you got Roberts out in center field, you got Anderson at shorts. They can line up and play with the Yankees with Stanton, Judge, Torres, Hicks, who else? Stanton and Sanchez, mixing those names up. But, truly these two teams are the best two teams in the American League. Once again, I'm going with the Chicago White Sox. I think they finally take that next step. I had them as my surprise team last year. They add Lance Lynn. They had a few other relief pitching corps, Liam Hendricks in the bullpen. So again, I think that the White Sox are ready for that next step. Now, maybe they're not ready for the prime time yet. We saw them fall short in the playoffs, and the Yankees have been there, done that. So potentially they have that advantage. But I'm going White Sox in 6, maybe 7 games in the ALCS. But I think the White Sox in 6 take care of New York to ultimately win the American League this year. And I think they're the team to beat when it comes to the AL. So what do you guys think out there? What did I get wrong? Who's going to make the playoffs? Is it not going to be the Blue Jays or the Twins? Do we have the Angels, Tampa? Who do you guys have in the wild card? Or am I pretty much spot on with everybody out there that's saying, hey, the White Sox and the Yankees on paper, without injuries, without concern, certainly look like the 2 teams that are going to be headed towards the ALCS. But that'll do it here for segment number 3 of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We'll step aside one last time here for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, I'll talk about the National League. I'll give you guys my NL playoff predictions. So stick around, everyone. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back to the 4th and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Love each and every one of you guys. If you guys enjoyed today's episode, be a friend, tell a friend. Share us with somebody out there. Baseball season is underway. Nobody really knows. That's my problem, like I talked about last segment. I mean, come on. Unless you're watching MLB Network, we're getting nothing here on ESPN this morning. But again, I guess workouts here are today, tomorrow, so maybe things will pick up here in the next 24 to 72 hours in regards to coverage out there. But if you guys like what you're hearing, please rate and review the podcast, like and subscribe. I know I ask you guys, but it certainly does help us continue to grow and bring you guys quality content here on almost a daily basis from the baseball podcast here. So I just wrapped up the American League, where the White Sox are going to be representing in the World Series. Now it's time to find out in the National League who ultimately is going to be playing in the Fall Classic. And starting out similarly to the American League, that number 4 team, that first wild card, I think everybody understands is either going to be the Dodgers or the Padres. I mean, these are arguably the 2 best teams in the National League. And again, without the expanded playoffs where the top 2 are guaranteed into the divisional round, one of them's going to be playing a one-and-done game in regards to the wild card. And this is where things get really fascinating in the National League, because I'm going with the Dodgers winning the West, being the 1 seed. No surprise there after bringing back Turner, signing Bauer. I certainly think penciling them in the 1 isn't above comprehension, but the Padres not far behind, as I think both of those teams are going to win 100-plus games. I think, again, you're going to have a 162 record for a wild card team playing a one-and-done game with San Diego. But the number 5 slot in this wild card is going to be fascinating. And this is where I think the Padres are going to be rooting for some teams more than others. Because when it comes down to that second wild card, so we have 2 out of the NL West, we go to the National League Central. I have the Cardinals winning that division after bringing back Wainwright, bringing back Molina, bringing in Nolan Arenado. The Cubs shipped Darvish out of town, a couple of other guys. The Brewers haven't seen the improvement from years past. Ryan Braun no longer with the team, so I like the Cardinals to win the NL Central, but I like the Cubs to potentially finish in second place in that division over the Brewers, so put Chicago into this conversation. And then you have basically the entire National League East. Again, I'm going with the Braves. Until somebody beats the Braves, I'm penciling them in. They were up 3-1 in the NLCS over the Dodgers last year. They brought back Ozuna. They lost a couple of starters, but bring in Charlie Morton, bring in Drew Smyly. They lost Melanson from the bullpen. The bullpen was already a trouble piece. But again, I think the Braves are winning the NL East, so let's put them in there. And then you have Washington, who won the World Series in 2019, the last time they played a full season and everyone was healthy. You have the New York Mets, who added Lindor, added McCann, added a bunch of other pieces, have the top rotation potentially. And then you have the Phillies, who were top 5 in runs scored last year, brought back everybody from that offense, improved the bullpen. The starting pitching had an ERA around 4, had leads in 47 out of 60 games, so should have made the playoffs. And between those 4 teams, this is where I'm talking about, I think San Diego is going to be certainly rooting for either the Cubs or the Phillies. Because if you get into a one-and-done game against the New York Mets or the Washington Nationals, and you have to go against Max Scherzer, Steven Strasburg, or you get the Mets where you get Jacob deGrom, Marcus Stroman potentially coming at you. I mean, if you're going one-and-done against Max Scherzer or Jacob deGrom, you could get beat that day. I don't care how good of a team you have, how good your offense is out there in San Diego. I don't care if it's Hosmer, Machado, Tatis, Kim, any of these guys across the infield. And just, oh man, that would be a heck of a thing to see a team win 100 games during the regular season, run into Max Scherzer, who was lights out for one day, goes 8 innings scoreless, and they win the game 4-2 after the bullpen gives up 2 runs in the 9th inning. I would just, as a Padres fan, be very, very weary of this wild card game. Or you get Jacob deGrom, who should have won the National League Cy Young again last year. Trevor Bauer wins it, but deGrom's 2. He's won it years past. He's going to be right up there again. So deGrom goes 8 scoreless against you. It'll be fascinating to kind of watch that game. And from the Padres side, are they running out Yu Darvish, who struggled in the playoffs a couple of times, doesn't have great October stats? Are you running out Blake Snell, who's only gone 5 innings, 6 innings deep in the playoffs? Everybody knows last year what happened in the World Series and all that talk of what's going on. Or you're running out Musgrove, who was in Pittsburgh and hasn't really thrown in a lot of big innings. Or one of the kids. You're running out Lamet or kind of Paddock. What's going on out there? So the experience for Washington and New York in that moment could give San Diego trouble. But I'm just going to be, the better man here. And ultimately, hey, I picked the Nationals, okay? I know I just went around there aloof with all these teams that could win the number 5 spot, but I picked Washington because I have them finishing second in the NL East, slightly ahead of the Phillies and the Mets. So I think the Nationals make the wild card. I think they face off against the Padres. I'll give the Padres the advantage. Maybe Scherzer's human that day. Maybe Strasburg's human that day, depending on who goes in the rotation. Darvish throws well. Snell throws well. Whatever it is, I picked Yu Darvish to win that game here in this particular case. But, man, wouldn't that be a fascinating one-and-done game with a 100-win Padres team going against a deGrom or a Scherzer in a win-or-go-home scenario? That would just be absolutely electric for everybody who's not a Padres fan to watch and see if that would be the case. But that sets up the Dodgers and the Padres in the divisional round. Again, I have the Dodgers as the number 1 team. The wild card winner would face off against the Dodgers. That's San Diego. These 2 teams, arguably the best 2 teams in the National League. Would this be the de facto championship series? I mean, one could argue that. So, game 1, you'd have Clayton Kershaw versus Blake Snell. Then you'd go Bauer, Musgrove, Buehler, Darvish, Price, Lamet, and then back to Kershaw and Snell in game 5. And man, this is just fascinating because the Dodgers, with their depth and starters out there, they got a lot of arms. Dustin May, Gonsolin out there. They're going to have to go down to AAA just due to the depth at the rotational side of things. So Snell's fantastic. Musgrove, Darvish, Lamet, all the starters on that side. Not to mention Clevinger, if he's able to come back, but it looks like he's going to be out for the entirety of the season. Just wanted to sprinkle that in there ever so quickly. So offensively, like I said, San Diego, you got Hosmer, you got Kim at second base, you got Tatis, you got Machado, you got Nola behind the dish. It's just loaded offensively over there. And then, of course, everybody knows the Dodgers offense. Their outfield, Bellinger, Betts. They got Turner back at third. It's just loaded on that side of things as well. Seager at shortstop. So ultimately, which way is this going to go? And I think the regular season will give us a nice kind of outlook as to who may have the advantage at this point. Again, these guys are going to play a handful of times, similarly to the Twins and the White Sox. going at it on the American League side in the divisional round. I mean, if the Dodgers are, 12-4 during the regular season against the Padres and somehow have their number, maybe this goes a little bit different. Or if the Padres are 12-4 and somehow in the Dodgers' head, what's happening there? So this would be the fantastic series. I think it goes the length just due to the matchups. Pitching wild, Musgrove, Bauer would be fantastic. Darvish, Buehler would be excellent. Price, Lamet, I think, is the only one with a clear advantage to LA side of things. But then again, David Price didn't play last year. So how was he able to stay in shape? Has he lost anything? Has anything fallen off for him when it comes to performance? But ultimately, I'm going Dodgers in 5. For this particular case, I think they're the two best teams. I think the Padres bullpen that they continue to add to, like I said, Melanson just added over there. Keela just added back there. They've added a number of arms that I can't even remember off the top of my head. Going against maybe a Kenley Jansen on the last year of his career that continues to falter on the back end. He had some blips last year, but got it done in the playoffs. So maybe the Padres able to steal a couple of games late against the Dodgers bullpen, which could be their Achilles heel this year. So I'll go Dodgers in 5 just because, again, I think they're slightly better than the Padres on paper, but I don't think it would be out of the realm of possibility to see the Padres upset the Dodgers here in the divisional round as well. The other divisional series in the National League, obviously then is the 2-seed Atlanta Braves. I think they're the number 2 with the Cardinals, like I mentioned, coming in at number 3. The Cardinals, similar to the Astros, I think they're looking at 85 and 77. There you go. I updated my math by saying number 3 to add to 162, but I think they get in as the best team in the Central. Now, how does this pitching line up here? You got Soroka for the Braves going against Flaherty for the Cardinals. I like Flaherty. I think he's got a slight advantage there. You got Fried versus Wainwright going game 2. Morton versus Hung Kim going game 3. Anderson versus Ponce de Leon. And then Soroka versus Flaherty going back here for game 5. And this is where I just think the depth of Atlanta's offense is going to outweigh that Cardinals pitching staff. I really think Atlanta, with Freeman, with Acuna, with Albies, with, Travis DeHarnone behind the dish, continuing to hit offensively. I think it's just one of those things where that offense is going to overwhelm that Cardinals pitching staff. And I think Flaherty is a great starter, potentially in game 1, could steal game 1. But I like Fried, Morton, Anderson going the next 3 games for the Braves against the Cardinals, ultimately to give them the advantage. The Cardinals offense, yes, with Nolan Arenado, will be very improved. I mean, you got Arenado, you got Goldschmidt, you got Molina back, but they lost the second baseman to the Brewers during the offseason. Maybe the Dylan Carlson out in the outfield continues to develop as he was a top prospect, but has yet to really hit at the National League level. They moved on from Dexter Fowler offensively, so I just think the depth of the Braves offensively is going to be a bit too much for the Cardinals to handle. I'm going Atlanta Braves in 4 games, winning the divisional series to move on for a rematch of the NLCS last year of the Dodgers and Braves. And once again, the Braves had a 3-1 series lead over the Dodgers last year, and if they had a better bullpen, could have potentially hung on and been the NL representative, but everybody knows how that played out. The Dodgers winning 3 straight, then going on to the World Series, pretty much rolling from that point on. So how does this one end up here? We got Clayton Kershaw versus Soroka, game 1. You got Bauer, Fried, game 2. Buehler, Morton, game 3. Charlie Morton, once again, finds himself going against the Dodgers like he did for the Rays last year. David Price versus Anderson in game 4. And then back to the top of Kershaw, Bauer, Buehler versus Soroka, Fried, and Morton in the rotational side of things. And honestly, from last year to this year, I think one team has gotten a lot better, or at least even a little bit better, and the other team has maybe gotten worse slightly, and that's the Dodgers. I think they've gotten better. Adding Bauer, it's tough not to agree with that. Bringing back Turner. Yes, they moved some additional pieces, some bullpen guys moving on, but the Braves, I just think they didn't improve a lot. They lost some pitching. They lost some bullpen help. They haven't added a ton in the bullpen. So ultimately, I think this one is a bit of a mismatch. I'd go Dodgers in either 5 or 6 games. My gut told me 5, but my head said give the Braves an extra game to go 6. But, Kershaw, Bauer, Buehler, Price, Kershaw is going to be tough to overcome, even with that offense of Atlanta. So Atlanta's going to have to hit the cover off the ball like they did last year. I mean, they brought back Ozuna in the outfield to go with all those other guys I mentioned. Freeman's your MVP. Acuna's fantastic. D'Arnaud, Albies. I mean, they are very deep. Pache out in center field, a top prospect. So, it's no walk in the park for the Dodgers, but I just think that depth that they have there, Betts, Bellinger, just, oh my God, coming at you piece after piece after piece, Seager, Turner, whoever it is, it's going to be tough for Atlanta to hang with that. And I think the Dodgers are going to represent the National League in the World Series here once again. I mean, their payroll over $250 million. You better believe it's World Series or bust when it comes to expectations out in L.A. So that would bring up a World Series of White Sox versus Dodgers. Maybe I'll preview that one here next week, talk about it a little bit during one of the segments here, but I'll leave you on that cliffhanger. So I have the White Sox and the Dodgers going at it. Who ultimately is your pick in the World Series? Leave us a comment. Let me know ultimately which one do you think I'm off with, or if that's a solid pick. I know I'm kind of going with everybody there in regards to those being the top teams, but I really do see on paper that matchup playing out here over the course of 162. But that'll do it for today's episode. Another great episode in the books here for you guys. Appreciate y'all listening once again. We talked at the top of today's episode about spring training, pitchers and catchers. Are there going to be fans? What's the schedule look like? So if you guys missed all that or want some more information, give it a Google. If you're trying to get down to a game and see it in person, figure out when tickets are available and where at. We then discussed all the latest signings that are happening out there, a ton of one-year deals across the board. Of course, the Mets, Yankees, A's, Padres continue to make moves, as well as the Braves, Twins, and Pirates bringing in some candidates here to improve the depth in the rotation. And then at the end of today's episode, like I just discussed, the White Sox winning the American League, ultimately advancing past the Yankees in the ALCS, with the National League coming down to the Dodgers and Braves. But I think the best series being the Dodgers and the Padres in the divisional round to see ultimately who advances there. So please, one last time, I'll ask you to check us out on social media. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, as well as like, rate, and review the podcast, share, subscribe, all that good stuff here. But that does it for today's episode. I appreciate you guys listening in once again. As always, I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. You guys have a fantastic weekend out there, and I'll talk to everybody again on Monday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.